Hello again. I'm back with another clock. This one I found at a local thrift store. It caught my eye because it looked quite old and it's rather large. This one is a Seth Thomas electric chime clock. I had worked on one of these previously, which I was unable to repair, and hopefully I'll be successful with this one. Let me turn it around so you can see the back of it. When you open it up, what I notice is that this mechanism looks very similar to the one that I worked on my previous Seth Thomas chime clock. And what I'm assuming is the fact that a company called GTI, and that's the company that makes the Seth Thomas clocks, they purchased what at the time was the Hamilton Sangamo Clock Company, and that's the reason that I find Sangamo motors in Seth Thomas clocks. That was the situation in the first one of these that I tried to repair. It was the motor that I wasn't able to repair, and I'm expecting to see a Sangamo motor on the inside of this one. A few things to note here. One is there's a lever with which you can turn the chime on or off if you want it to chime or not. There's also a small key over here, and there's an arbor that's attached to a spring. This fits like this. And apparently, according to the directions on the label, this is to be used only if the clock doesn't start when plugged in. In that case, you wind the spring, and it's only to be used when you're setting the clock up for the first time. So I don't know if I'll ever need to use that. Also, on this instruction label is a code down here, 5006. Looks very similar to what I've seen as date codes, which would indicate something like June of 1950. But I really think this clock is a lot older than that. I do know that on other Seth Thomas clocks I've worked on, they have a date code that's stamped on the plates that are inside here. So I might be able to get a more accurate estimate of exactly when this clock was made. Another thing I can tell is that this is not an original power cord, and I don't know if you can see it from here, but there's a small metal clip here, and this is designed for this power cord to pass through it, and it gets tucked into this little notch so that you can close the door over the power cord, sort of like that. I have already plugged it in, and I know that it doesn't run. But what I haven't done is to test this with my own meter to see if the circuit's intact. So let me get this set up on my work table, and I'll have a go at it. The clock mechanism is most likely going to come out through the back of the case. So what I have to do first is remove the hands. I don't know if this washer comes off of here or not. Yes, it does. That's a little tight. Well, I'm not going to look to damage this dial. I'll put a little bit of WD-40 around here. That I've had really good luck loosening up tight clock hands. Another thing I'm realizing is that this video, it could take me long enough to repair this clock that this might turn into a two-part video. Just spray a little bit of it into a small cap. And then just put a little bit of around the edge of the hand. None of it's touching the dial. There's no risk of staining it or damaging a finish that might be on here. And I'll give this a good 5 or 10 minutes to soak in. while it soaks, I just realized that I never tested the circuit with my ohm meter. So let me do that. Just have to touch the leads to the plug, and if the circuit is intact, you'll see numbers flashing. Okay, the circuit's intact, which means that in theory this should be repairable. And now I'll just wait a few more minutes before trying to remove the hour hand. Okay, I'm ready to try again. Much easier. Another thing I've noticed is that these are not small screws holding the dial in place. These look like little nails. And there's also a couple of holes by the 12 and the 6, as if it was meant to have 2 more nails holding it, but none were placed. Anyway, let's flip this over again. Now to remove the mechanism, several screws, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I don't know if you can see all of them. It'll take me a while to undo it. I'll remove them, and when I'm ready to have to remove the mechanism, then I'll continue. The screws are out. I'm going to try to remove the mechanism. What I don't know yet is if I'll be able to pass it up through here without having to remove these chime bars first. Kind of a tight fit. Oh, I think I got it. Okay. Let's see if I can move this power cord out of here. I don't know if there's clearance at the end here. There should be. All right, I'm not going to force it and bend anything. Let me try to take a closer look. Once I clear that wire out of here, I'll continue. Okay, the wire is out. Let me move the case aside. And I should mention, for such an old clock, this case is in very good condition, all things considered. Okay, now let's take a look at this. Well, this is very different from the previous Seth Thomas that I tried to repair. In particular, I don't believe that this is a Sangamo motor. Or if it is, it's a different style than the one I'm used to seeing. Anyway, what I want to do is set this up, plug it back in, and see what happens. Something else I'm noticing that I hope won't be a concern, but when I removed the screws from the case, I found these sort of plastic washers, almost as spacers on either side, and they're crumbling. I have some pieces of it here. And I don't know when this goes back into the clock. Here you can see one's kind of half gone. If that's going to cause it to not be as snug as it should be, I guess I'll find out. Also, let me move this towel out of the way. I use it as a cushion because I had the clock sitting on the glass. Okay. Let me plug it in. And turn it on. nothing. Okay, I imagine the next step, I'm just going to have to start taking it apart. So, got to take a good long look at it, figure out which way to approach it. I recall from the previous one that I'll access it from this side. There's two plates here. So, I just have to figure out what I'm going to take off first. So, give me a few minutes on that. One thing I noticed is that this motor is held down by just 3 screws. The previous one I worked on, that wasn't the case. I had to take the whole thing apart to remove the motor. So let me try to take this off and just test to see if the motor is running at all, or if it's not spinning because the gears are so frozen from old dirt and oil. But I definitely need to know that the motor is working first. The screws are removed. The motor lifts out. And I'm missing a little washer somewhere. But anyway, let me plug this in. And turn it on. And look at that. It's working. Very good. So now it has to be an issue with all of these gears that it's attached to. Something here must be binding, dirty, probably just needs a good cleaning and lubricating of everything. So let me get started on figuring out how I want to take this apart. And once I think I know what I'm doing, then I'll continue. But the first thing I'm going to do is take a lot of photos so I have a good idea of how these gears are supposed to be positioned when I attempt to put everything back together. So I'll get to work on all of that. A couple of things I've noticed, however, that I want to mention is on the motor, it reads General Time Instruments Corp. That's GTI. That's the company that makes Seth Thomas clocks. So this is a Seth Thomas motor. It also has a stamp on it here that says 1149, which is November of 1949 is the date that the motor was assembled, which means that that stamp on the back of the case, which reads 5006, I'm pretty certain that that means the clock was assembled in June of 1950. Anyway, let me get back to work on figuring out how I want to take this all apart. Well, call me crazy, but before taking it apart, I figured since I know that the motor is now working, I put the motor back into position and then turned it on and discovered that everything's working. I don't know if you can see that or not. The gear is turning here. So what I think I'm going to do before disassembling it is place this back into the case and see just how well it's running. Is it chiming properly? Is it keeping good time? Because I do see a great deal of dirt, built up dirt oil on these gears in here. And it could stand to get a good cleaning. So next, I'll pop this back into the case. Okay, the clock has been running now for about 4 hours while I watched the Jets finally beat the Patriots. Hooray. And I've noted 2 things about it. One is it's been keeping perfect time, and the other thing is that it's not chiming. So I looked again at the instructions on the back door and realized that I was mistaken earlier when I said that that little key was used to wind the spring if the clock didn't start running. That's really meant to be used if the clock doesn't start chiming. So I went back in, wound that spring an additional amount, and as soon as I did that, it started to chime. It played what's called the Westminster tones. That's the notes that you hear played right before it strikes whatever hour it is. But that's all it did. It didn't strike the hour. And when I advanced the hands, it didn't strike on the half hour or on the hour, nor did it play the Westminster tones anymore. So I really don't know why that is. I may have to do some research to try to figure out how to get the chime working, to look at how the gears and everything is lined up in there. Everything looks intact, but it is pretty gunked up. I still plan to take the whole thing apart, give it a good cleaning. Hopefully that will be all it takes to get everything up and running properly. So next, I'm going to open it back up, take it out of the case, and look to disassemble it. Okay, I've removed the mechanism from the case again. And one thing I'm not happy with is the wire job connecting this power cord. So I'm going to undo this and just totally remove this cord from the motor, and later on I'll reattach a new one. I'm going to approach taking this apart by removing this plate first. There's two plates on here. Before I can get this removed though, I have to take these little pieces off, and what holds them on, I'll try to show you, they're called C-clips. There's one over here, here. This part here is held on by a clip. There's one here and here. You kind of have to pop them off and be careful not to lose them. I've also taken a lot of photos, so I think I have a good idea where everything goes. So let me get started on that. I've removed the power cord from the motor. Next, I'm going to start to remove the parts that are sitting on top of the plates. It'll take a few minutes for me to remove all of the C-clips. I'll try to zoom in so you can see exactly what I'm talking about. There's one over here, an unusual one here, a couple on the back, here and here. The key is not to damage or lose them as you kind of pop them off. Once I have them removed, I should be able to illustrate how these parts are removed. So let me get to work on that. The more I look at this, the more I see, I'm noticing there's a couple of very small springs attached to these parts. There's one right over here and another one over here. And I have to be really careful to not only remove it without damaging them or losing them, but making sure I know exactly how they go back into place. Also trying to learn the names of these parts. This is called the rack, and I know it's supposed to move freely back and forth, but I can hardly budge it. And hopefully once this is cleaned and lubricated and moving freely, maybe that's all it takes to get the chimes working. I've also come up with, I think, a better way of supporting the movement. The key is I don't want to end up bending any of these chime hammers. Anyway, back to work on the C-clips. I've removed the clips from here and the two underneath these two parts. And this is a pleasant surprise for me. A while ago when I was trying to repair what was my very first chime clock, I picked up a book on chime clock repair, but it wasn't of much use at the time because it was specific to a handful of clock brands, and what I was working on wasn't one of them. But I pulled the book out now just to try to help me name and identify these parts, and I discovered, and this is the book, Chime Clock Repair. I discovered that one of the models that are in here happens to be Seth Thomas. And these are some pretty old wind-up clocks, not an electric one. But I see a photo of their movement, and this is pretty close to identical to what I'm working on now, which I couldn't believe my eyes. This one, though, has 3 springs for winding up for the time and the chime and the Westminster tones. And if I open up the next page, the arrangement of these gears and parts, it's pretty much identical to what you see here. So this is going to go a long way, I hope, to helping me figure out how to get this clock going. There are sections in here about adjusting for the chime. There are chime arms that could be set too high or too low. It's quite involved. but it's encouraging. One thing I am noticing, there is so much dirt and grease built up in these pivots and the bushings here that it's kind of a miracle that any of these gears are turning at all. But as I said, I've removed the clips here and here. These two parts should remove. And it appears to me that, although I'm having trouble taking this clip off, these parts are attached to this top plate here. I think I can remove this plate next. So let me do that. Now, it could be a couple of minutes to remove this. I don't want to lift it up and risk having the gears come out with it because they could be stuck here. I may have to lubricate and clean out some of this dirt. And once I know I can safely remove the plate, then I'll continue. I can also mention that the clock in the book is called the Seth Thomas model number 124. But the clock that I'm working on here, according to the label on the back door, says it's the Simsbury Model 2F. Anyway, I'm going to go back to working on removing the plate now. I was having a hard time lifting the plate, so what I did was I removed the C-clip here. I managed to do that, which lets me take off this gear and this one, and then I was able to lift this up. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do, and something fell out here, I got to see what that's from. Take more photos of the positioning of these gears before I remove everything, and I'll have to do a lot of work cleaning these up. They're really full of a lot of oil and dirt. I'll try to zoom in on that for you. It's a real mess in there. So let me get to work on that. And I was able to figure out where this small washer came from. I assumed that they sat on these posts, one here and here. But when I went back and looked at some of the photos I took, I was able to confirm because I could see it sandwiched between the post and the plate that sat on top. So another reason to take a lot of pictures when you're trying to repair one of these clocks. What I want to do is remove these gears so that I can clean them. There's so much built up dirt and oil that they're difficult to remove. So I'm going to do the same thing I did on the top of the bushings where I cleaned and lubricated where the pivots went, except this time I'll do it on the bottom. There's still a lot of dirt on all the pivots here. Once I clean that up, they'll probably come off much more easily. So let me get to work on that. I've loosened up the gears. They're still pretty tight, but I can remove them. First, the plate that the motor sat on, that comes off. Here's one, two, 4, and one more. And the amount of dirt that's on these, just to show you close up. What I'm going to do next is place all of these in my ultrasonic with some hot soapy water. I use Dawn dish detergent. I want to get everything very cleaned, and I want to reposition them here before I take off this plate, because I don't want all the gears off at the same time. It'll end up being more confusing than it has to be. So let me work on cleaning all of this up first. I'm also going to place this plate in the ultrasonic. Hopefully it'll clean it up well enough to loosen the rack so that this moves more freely, and then I won't have to worry about taking off the spring here. So I'll get started on all of that. Okay, I've cleaned all the parts, and what I'm happy to see is that I didn't have to remove the spring because the rack got cleaned thoroughly enough that when I move it, it just springs back on its own. So this is, I'm sure, how it was intended to function. Another thing that I noticed of interest is that there are actually two springs here. And so I don't get confused when I remove them, I labeled an L and an R for left and right. And I realize now that when I was winding the spring earlier, I was only winding one of them because the other one was blocked by part of the plate here. I don't know if I can turn this over to show it or not. But when I wound the spring earlier, I was winding this arbor here, but there's a hole in this plate here, and that's how you engage the other spring. And I'm sure that one of them gives you the chime on the hour, and the other is what's giving you the Westminster tones. As for how these gears all go back together, let's see if I got this. I believe that goes there. Oh, hang on, let me figure this out before I continue. Yeah, I think I got it. This one goes here. And the plate that holds the motor. Now that I know where all of these go, I'm going to work next on removing this plate to access the gears that are under here. That'll take some time. Once I'm ready to remove this, then I'll continue. I've been having some difficulty removing the plate, but I figured out why, and I just want to show the reason. This part here is attached on the other end to this gear. They act like a sandwich, sort of holding these two plates together. And then I spotted a small screw right in there. So once I undo that, I think this gear will come off and then I can get the plates apart. I just wanted to pass on that tip in case you're ever trying to fix one of these yourself. Anyway, let me work on that. I've removed the part, but I still can't get the plate off. And it turns out there's another part that has to be removed first. The one right beneath the one that was here is a C-clip holding this in. This connects to one of the springs over here. And the gears kind of mesh in there, so I can't just remove that separately. Anyway, I'll pop off the C-clip, take out that part, then I should be able to remove the plate. And you really need to go over these things with a fine-tooth comb to figure everything out. I've removed the plate. I'll try to show it. Most of the gears stay stuck to the plate. And the rest of them are down here. So I'll take a few photos of this arrangement and then remove them one by one and look to clean them up the same way I did the first set of gears. So I got some work cut out for me here. Okay, I've cleaned up all of the parts and I've been trying to follow some of the directions in the book, but because this one is strictly a wind-up clock, it's not nearly as complex as this one. And I'll show you what I mean. Here's a photo of the gears that are between the two plates, and there's almost none, just very few, compared to what you see here because it's an electric clock. Another thing it said was that you had to remove the spring holding these parts to the plate, but in doing so, it'll probably get bent and you'll have to replace the spring. And I don't have any replacement parts, so I elected to just placed the entire plate in the ultrasonic, and I have to say it cleaned up pretty good. The next step is going to be to lubricate everything and then reposition them back on the plates. That's going to take an awfully long time, and to have you watch that, that's pretty similar to watching paint dry. So I'm just going to go ahead and reassemble the whole thing, and when I come back, you'll see the plates back in position over the gears. Okay, I was able to position the gears, secure the plate on top of this part. Everything, I'm pretty certain, is in the exact position it was when I started. When I spin gears, everything's moving in here. And I can't begin to tell you just how incredibly difficult it was to do this. I'm certain that setting up the gears on this part is going to be a lot easier. But I really marvel at the technicians who put these clocks together for a living. It's really quite a skill set. Anyway, let me get to work on the other half. I was able to get everything reassembled. I've lubricated all of the pivots and the bushings on both sides. The only thing I have left to do is to reattach the motor. But before I do that, I need to attach a power cord onto the end of it. I'm not going to show that here. If you need to know how that's done, I have a separate video how to replace a power cord. But for now, I'm going to get to work on that. Place it back here and then plug it in again, make sure and we'll find out if it's working. I've attached the power cord, seated the motor. Let me plug it in and turn it on. And it's running. See if I can show you. How about that, huh? Very cool. So what I'm going to do next is, and the one thing I can't tell, even though it's running, I can't tell from holding it in my hand if the chimes are going to work. But I'm going to place this back into the case. Let me turn it off. Put the hands on it and advance the hands to find out if it's chiming. So once I get it back into the case and I'm ready to do that, then I'll continue. As you can see, I have it set up and it's chiming, but the chime is kind of out of whack because after it plays the whole tune, it just keeps going. It doesn't stop. And the spring winds down really fast. In fact, I think I have to wind up the time chime spring. Let me turn this off. That mutes it. Not sure if the time will chime here. It almost started to go. And there it goes. So it's sort of working, but definitely not 100%, and I don't have the wherewithal to figure out how to correct the chimes. But I am very happy that it's running, that I was able to take it apart and get it back together. I'll flip it around so you can see the front. I only have the minute hand. I was just advancing that to change the time. But I'll set it up with the minute hand and the hour hand and give you a final look at it. The hands are back on. It's running well and it's keeping good time. I'm just sorry that the chimes are not working the way they were meant to be. And that's pretty much it for this one. It's a Seth Thomas electric chime clock. The model is the Simsbury. It's from 1950. I know this was a really long video. I hope you enjoyed it and were able to hang in there for it. And that pretty much wraps things up. Bye for now.